on Case Studies with Janessa, we're looking at negligence standard of care, Hooker versus Dawson Road Maintenance Limited. The case I chose looks at the obligations of a company contracted by British Columbia for road maintenance and the expectations surrounding reasonable behavior and standard of care. The plaintiff, Mrs. Hooker, alleges that Dawson Road Maintenance, the defendant, did not meet standards of care, resulting in negligence and damage of property to her home and her soap business. I found this case interesting because it intersects on the public-private relationship, expectations of reasonable behavior. It defines standard of care as well as discusses tort laws and negligence to determine whether the company met or exceeded the professional standard of care. One point that stood out to me was that the plaintiff chose to sue the private company delivering contracted services for road maintenance rather than the ministry, or to go to her private insurance to cover the loss of personal and business material from the flooding. As a business owner myself, it made me curious. What would prompt the plaintiff to go after the business versus using insurance or suing the ministry? I would like to introduce Melanie Hooker, the plaintiff. She is our soap aficionado. There's also Mr. Construction. He's representing Dawson Road Maintenance, or the defendant. He is also known as our culvert unplugger. And last but not least, the Honorable Mr. Justice Punnett, who's the ultimate decision maker. Melanie Hooker, our plaintiff, is suing Dawson Road Maintenance Limited, the defendant, for nuisance and negligence for damages arising from a series of floods onto her property and into her home, caused by plugged culverts under an adjacent provincial roadway. I will focus on the negligence portion of this proceeding. The issues that need to be decided are whether the defendant was negligent in maintaining the road near the plaintiff's property, and if they were negligent, whether the negligence caused or contributed to the first flood or the second flood. Another issue, whether the defendant is liable in nuisance to the plaintiff for damages caused by the first flood and the second flood, as well as the quantification of damages attributable to each flood. I would also like to bring your attention to this lovely red triangle over here. It shows that the liability in this case is composed of British Columbia, who owns the road, the defendant, who is the contractor for road maintenance, as well as the plaintiff, Mrs. Hooker, who is the property owner. In order to truly understand this case, we must look at the facts. On this slide, you will see Mrs. Hooker's house, Aldous Road, as well as the twin culvert in question. Looking at Schedule A, the agreed statement of facts, it tells us that the plaintiff lives at 1470 Aldous Street, which has twin culverts adjacent to the property that pass under Aldous Street. A creek that runs through these culverts and drains into the Skeena River is the culprit of all of this destruction. The defendant was contracted by British Columbia to provide highway maintenance services which were specified under Schedule 1 of the aforementioned contract. This contract began on October 1st, 2019. The defendant did not own any property adjoining the plaintiff's property. Prior to August 20th, 2020, the plaintiff was not aware of any issues with the twin culvert. This was including, but not limited to, obstructions or flooding. This case involves 4 floods. The first flood occurred August 20th, 2020. The plaintiff notified the defendant at 6:39 p.m. that the twin culverts appeared to be blocked and that the water was rising. The defendant arrived at 7:09 p.m. and began diverting water with pumps, as well as remaining on site overnight. During this time, Aldous Street partially collapsed and compromised a community water line. 2 inches of water entered the plaintiff's basement during this time. Flood number 2, August 21st, 2020. The morning of August 21st, most of the water has receded from the plaintiff's basement. Defendant employees remained present at the property, and by 11 a.m. the creek had overflowed and flooded the basement again, with approximately 3 feet of water. It reached its highest point of 4 feet, 2 inches by 2 o'clock p.m. All of the plaintiff's business inventory, supplies, furnishings, equipment, and other items in the basement were damaged. The third flood occurred September 1st, 2020. The plaintiff discovered 18 inches of water in her basement. There were no items in the basement at this time. The fourth flood, September 6th, 2020, the plaintiff discovered 12 more inches of water in her basement. Again, there were no items in the basement at this time. In conclusion, the biggest takeaway from this case, in my opinion, is that when a contractor meets or exceeds the standard of care within industry, it shields them from liability when things go wrong. In this case, the defendant did everything it was required to contractually, going above contractual duties in some cases. For example, they had a much faster response time than required to the initial complaint. It is important as a business leader to understand the contracts that their business has entered to ensure that duties and risks are clearly defined and that they maintain documentation of their actions. In this case, much of what proved the defendant's case was documentation and records of response times, actions, etc. The defendant not only met standards, but actually exceeded them in a few areas. Their response times were faster than required, and they stayed on site continuously to monitor the progression of the flooding. They attempted multiple methods to clear obstructions beyond the base protocol provided by the ministry, as well as prolonged on-site work. In the end, the negligence claim was dismissed.